Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Podcast Boys. I am one of your hosts, Connor Nielsen. Joining me, as always, is the Comics Kid 2099. How are you doing, Comics Kid?
I'm doing well, and how are you, Connor?
You know what? I'm doing all right. If you are new to this, we are, I guess, a Twin Peaks podcast. I guess Twin Peaks adjacent is the term we've been using for some time now. Once upon a time, we went through every single episode of the hit TV show Twin Peaks and its movie and its revival season. But then now we just kind of go through movies, episodes of television shows where we look at, we pick them because they have Twin Peaks alumni or some kind of Twin Peaks connection. Today is 2006's The Prestige, which features David Bowie, who was in the film Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Comics Kid, why don't you give a plot synopsis? Explain to us Christopher Nolan's The Prestige.
Okay. This is, I think, based on a book. I haven't read the book. I don't know who wrote the book, but I was trying to do like seconds before you pass the baton to me. I was trying to look it up. Yeah. Christopher Priest was the novelist who wrote The Prestige. And so other than like Batman, this is like one of Christopher Nolan's only things that's like not based on his own work and concepts and ideas. But this is set in the 1800s, and it follows two stage magicians played by Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman, who an incident happens on stage that kind of fractures their working relationship and kind of sets them against each other for several years to come. And it's sort of difficult to follow because it's a non-linear movie. It's jumping around in time. Like in the first, I want to say 10 minutes, you jump like 10 different, or not 10, wow, sorry. There's like 3 different jumps in the narrative in the first like 10 minutes. Like you're seeing stuff that's in the furthest bit of the future that you will be in the movie. And then you get like someone reading a diary, and then you get, even further back. And it took me, when I first discovered this movie, several different viewings before I was like, okay, I get what's going on here. And I would say, Connor, this is my favorite Christopher Nolan film. I have not watched Memento. I have not watched Interstellar. And what's that one with Robert Pattinson?
Tenet.
Tenet. I haven't seen Tenet, but so I guess half of his movies I haven't seen. But
have you seen Dunkirk?
No, I haven't seen Dunkirk. So I've seen even less than I thought. But of his movies I have seen, which is the Batman movies, The Prestige, and Inception, this is my favorite one. But Connor, what do you think of The Prestige?
So The Prestige, I'm trying to think about all the things we've seen for this podcast. I think this is my favorite movie that we have watched for this podcast.
Okay, yeah.
You're not going to agree with this, but I think the only competition that comes immediately to mind is James Cameron's Titanic. But I love this movie. I've always loved this movie. I remember watching this in high school. For anyone listening, I was born in 1995. I'm like a very late millennial, early Gen Z, like white guy who was like a nerd. So like obviously I like Christopher Nolan. His movies are made for me, and I'm like a part of that age where like when I was in high school, Christopher Nolan was the guy in Hollywood who was making movies. I think that as time has gone on and his style has evolved and the kinds of projects he has tackled have changed, he's sort of fallen out of favor with people like me. People like me have kind of like, he's not making Batman Begins and The Dark Knight anymore. He's making Tenet. And, for some people that's like, it's like a betrayal or whatever, but I've always liked him. I still like him. And I remember watching this in high school, and I'm a part of that movement of people where when we watched this, I watched this in like 2010, 2011, and I'm like, this is one of his best movies. Why is it his lowest rated on Rotten Tomatoes? Why isn't this talked about, in the same breath as like The Dark Knight and Inception? Like, this is just as good as those movies are. And I remember I watched this a couple of years ago with my girlfriend at the time, and she did not care for it, and it was probably the weakest viewing I had had of it. And I remember for the last couple of years, I've been like, yeah, like it's a very good movie, but it's not as good as it was when I was in high school. Like, obviously, when you're in high school and this is like you watch this, you're like, you've never seen anything like this. I'd started to see stuff like this. I'd gone back to Nolan's influences, and I'm seeing where he's pulling from. And I was like, hey, it's really good, but it's not as mind blowing as it was. But now that I've had some time and like maybe I had maybe lower expectations than, this is the best movie ever when I was in high school. Now I'm a 20 something. Let's see if it holds up. But now that I'm even a few years removed from that, I think this is one of Nolan's best movies. Of his early years, that I think like his first era, which I think sort of ends around Dark Knight. Like this is right before he gets into doing IMAX. So like his pre-IMAX era. This is really impressive, I think. It's got so much of his Nolan-isms that we can get into. But I like this a lot, and it hit pretty hard due to some pretty recent life moments that have been happening, and for myself personally, anyways. But I love this movie. Why don't you go into further thoughts? How do you feel about it? You said this is your favorite of the ones you've seen.
Yeah. So I also discovered this when I was in high school, and I'm a few years older than you, but as far as like having an opinion on like pop culture, like movies and books, I was not really good at that up until like I was in college, before I got to the point where I was capable of forming my own opinion and also explaining why I had that opinion. Like when I was in high school, if people said like, oh, the Tim Burton Batman movies are better because they're darker, I would be like, yeah, I agree with those guys. Joel Schumacher sucks. And now I'm like, I might like some things about the first Tim Burton Batman movie, and I like some things about Batman and Robin and Batman Forever. And so like I've gotten better. It took me a really long time to get to that point though, where I was like, this is why I like this for reasons X, Y, and Z, or I don't like it for reasons X, Y, and Z. And so this movie, like I said, took me a few times before, even like now, I would say like plot, like what are probably pretty basic plot points in this movie. It took me a few viewings to be like, oh, okay. But we talked about the movie The Founder, and I can't remember if it was you or Ben who said that like that's a pretty good movie for like showing someone who starts off as basically the hero of their story, and then they gradually become the villain by the end. And that movie, one of you had said that does a pretty good job of transitioning his character from heroic in his mind to villainous. And I think this movie blew my mind when I was a teenager, because I mean, it's going to be hard to, we always do spoiler podcasts anyway, but it's going to be really hard to talk about this one. But this movie, like when you start off at the beginning, Hugh Jackman is like kind of your protagonist. I mean, you're spending time with Christian Bale's character also, but Hugh Jackman is the one where you're like, man, I feel bad for him because his wife died, and so like you feel like you're kind of like, yeah, he's justified in wanting to get revenge on this guy who's responsible for his wife's death. But then by the end of the movie, I'm like, whoa, hang on a second, movie. Like, you're not allowed to do that. You tricked me. You turned him into a bad guy. And I'm like, I feel betrayed. And I'm just like, my mind is blown. And I'm like, I didn't think that was allowed. And now, I mean, like, we live in an era where how often is this done? Like, I just finished watching like House of the Dragon on HBO a couple weeks ago, and like that show is full of characters who are gray. Like sometimes a character will do something and you're like, ooh, I hate that character, and then the next week they do something and you're like, oh, I feel so bad for them. And so you have that. You've got like Breaking Bad. Like I feel like the era of the gray protagonist is much more prevalent now than it was in 2006, or it maybe in 2006 I was just much more like, I almost exclusively read superhero comics, and superhero comics, even the ones that are slightly more complex than the average bear, most of the time your superhero comics, you have your good guys and you have your bad guys. And so this movie really kind of opened the floodgates for me in that respect.
That's a good way of, I think, characterizing the movie. I really like the structure here a lot, which no, having seen more movies after this, it's kind of amazing that this works as well as it does, because this is one of the earliest versions of a movie that has like layers of framing devices.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a lot of events. Okay, so I don't know. The movie is weird because like it has this sprawling, years spanning story, and it has this like intriguing, mysterious tone that has like multiple layers of narrative, which gives it this sort of slow burn vibe. It feels sort of like, but like the point. But what's weird is that like they're sort of offset by this other thing where it's like the movie's actually very fast paced. There's a lot of scenes and events, and especially in like the first half, you will get like a scene that sets up something, and the very next scene it pays it off, where it like
Mm-hmm.
has a pretty quick momentum. Where and I'm trying to like give it a thought, but it's like you'll have a scene where Michael Caine will, you know, will say something like, "Oh, oi, stop kissing your wife's leg, because if I can see it, so can the people in rows 3 and 4." And then the very
Yeah.
next scene is just like Hugh Jackman's wife dies. You know what I mean? Where it's like you get like the scene establishing these two are married, and then like one or two scenes later, it's like, okay, now she's dead. So it's like you
Mm-hmm.
have, and then it's like one or two scenes later, now it's her funeral, and then it's like at her funeral, or sorry, no, it's like Hugh Jackman being there while his wife has drowned, and then him with his head in the sink trying to drown himself, remembering her drowning, and then it's like her funeral, and it's like a really weird like thing where it's cool because wow, I'm not articulate. I said it's a really thing. Anyways, the thing what's cool about this is it's like you can watch that almost like it's a sequence of memories culminating in the funeral, or it's like a montage of quick events, or it's it's Christian Bale reading a journal. So is this a series of entries? The way in which it's all kind of put together is it's actually very, very fast paced. Like you're getting these scenes that are like set up payoff continuation, you know, pledge turn prestige, like, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like you're getting like all of these things where it's like the events are happening very quickly, the scenes are very fast, and like there's a lot of scenes in this movie. There's a lot of extras. If you look at the cast of this movie, it's a very long cast. However, it does have this slow burn like intrigue. You're always like kind of on the edge of your seat waiting for these like reveals to eventually come, because it does take place over a long period of time. But what's wild though is the way they frame all of this stuff is, as I said earlier, again, you were saying in your description, it's a little hard to try to describe to somebody, because it's like we begin in media res, where Christian Bale is in jail for the murder of Hugh Jackman, and then while he's in prison, he gets a journal that is Hugh Jackman's journal, and then like when he's reading that, that becomes the movie, and then in Hugh Jackman's journal, he is reading Christian Bale's journal,
Mm-hmm.
and so our perspective shifts. Where for certain stretches, Hugh Jackman is the lead because it's his journal come to life, but then at other times, Christian Bale is the lead because then it's Christian Bale's journal in Hugh Jackman's journal. But then as the movie progresses, but then sometimes it's like their memories. It's not really their journals. It's their memories that start to come into play. And then you start getting to like end of Act 2 into Act 3, you start getting these reveals that this isn't actually a reliable narrator. Their journals are actually like gotcha things where they're aware that the other person will be reading their journals. So like
Mm-hmm.
you get like these twisty turny, unreliable narrator, non-linear, multiple layers of like narrative. Like you have all of these things going on, and it's kind of convoluted. And it's like we talked about Gotti, and like we laughed our butts off because it had like two or three like framing devices, and it's like no, you pick one, and that's
Mm-hmm.
it. This is doing that though too. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
doing it really, really well.
Yeah, you're right. Because when you were describing that, and I was thinking like I wasn't even thinking of Gotti. I was thinking of Ghosts of Mars, which I know we haven't talked about it, but that's another movie where you'll be like five layers deep in something that's going on, where someone will come in and say, "Hey, this thing will just happened," and then it like does the little blurry like Wayne's World thing, and then it's like in the thing that just happened that they're explaining, then they're like, "Hey, what's that over there?" And then like another, and so when you were describing that, I was thinking like, man, this sounds a lot like that. But, and I don't know how to describe it, but this movie works where those don't. Do you have any theories on why those movies? I mean, we're not like blowing anyone's minds by saying that Gotti was awful, but why does this movie work for doing something similar?
I think what this does is it properly gets us into the characters' heads. And we have these two men whose life obsession is another man. And so what's cool is the sleight of hand, where it feels like a reliable narrator before we realize they're unreliable narrators. And I think the way in which the way in which the scenes are presented to us feel like it is the truth, because these people are getting these diaries, these journals, like and like the way in which the scenes are presented to us feel like the way in which the diary is being presented to the person reading it. It feels like the truth, what we are actually watching, and that tells us something about the reader of the journal without us realizing it. And then once it's revealed that like Alfred Borden is reading, Angier's diary, and Angier's like, "Yes, Borden, I know it's you. I'm gonna ruin your life." And it's like, whoa, twist, turn, and then all of a sudden, them getting tricked tells us something about them, and it asks us to reframe the framing device, and it's all about the presentation. And because this is all about magicians, like the meta narrative of this entire thing is like, obviously it's about movies, but like there's a whole thing about this movie where it's like it's about the way in which audiences want to be fooled. It's about performance, and it's like about like all of these things, and we're watching people whose job it is to be that way falling for another person's performance, even though they think they are superior to them. But what we're talking about here is the way Nolan is succeeding where other filmmakers are failing. This is kind of his bread and butter. This is what he cut his teeth doing. Like, you look at his winning streak from like Batman Begins through Inception. You get Begins, this movie, Dark Knight, and Inception. I personally would throw in Dark Knight Rises into that list. Most people wouldn't. But like, you see like that period of his career where he is like rising through the ranks very quickly with every movie. And what I'm seeing, especially with this and then Inception, is like movies that I fell in love with in high school. And then as I've gotten older, I've seen movies that are like these ones, and I don't like them. Like, you watch Inception, it is ludicrous how much exposition is in Inception.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow, every time I watch Inception, I feel like, okay, I shouldn't like this as much as I do. Like, there are things in this movie that like I've now seen enough other movies to where I don't like movies that are like this. But I love Inception. That's my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. That's like a top 10 movie for me. And I think this is a similar thing where you have Gotti, you have stuff like Batman versus Superman that have like dream scenes with like when we were talking about like what was the Necromancer, where it's like we have flashbacks inside of a dream scene, and we're like, what is happening? Maybe that wasn't Necromancer. It was something else we talked about that had that to it, where it's like really confusing. There's like a coherence to it, and I think what I was talking about earlier might be why.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I also feel like I don't remember what exactly Nolan had done before this. I mean, Batman Begins has a little bit of jumping around up until he gets to Gotham, and then it's pretty much all linear. And then Memento is all told backwards, right?
Yes.
So honestly, normally I would say if anyone listening to this says someday I'm going to be a filmmaker and I'm going to do these nonlinear you know movies like Inception, or well, no, Inception's not really nonlinear, but the way it kind of when it jumps down and when once they get inside the Cillian Murphy's brain and then they start going into different layers, it kind of feels nonlinear because you're jumping around in different levels of the narrative. But the sorry, I just found out that he turned down directing the movie Troy in 2004, and my mind is blown. But normally I would say if you're thinking of becoming a filmmaker, try to master the normal, just a straightforward narrative. Try to get a hold of that. Like I've heard people say, learn the rules before you break the rules, and learn why the rules work before you discard them. And I don't know, Chris Nolan may just be really good at ignoring that and saying like, no, I'm just going to do an entire movie that's backwards, and then it works. Now, or maybe it works. I haven't seen Memento, but I've heard people, lavish praise on it, and so all these others like. Even though, like I said, Inception is not non-linear, the further you get in the third act, it certainly feels like it to me, because it's like you've got this guy on this layer, this guy on this layer, and what this guy is doing here affects kind of what's going on in all these others, and it's asking you to keep up with a lot, and that's similar to this movie and like the beginning of Begins, where you're jumping around quite a bit there as well. But yeah, I wish that I was more scholarly so I could like sit down and make a nice video essay that nobody would watch and talk about, why Chris Nolan is so good at this. And I'm glad you mentioned sleight of hand. I would love to pick his brain, because I really do think maybe Chris Nolan wanted to be a stage magician at some point, because I have seen people say that his career, like that, I don't remember which ones it was. This was probably around the time when Inception came out, where someone said that his movies, it might have actually been the Batman trilogy, where they said Begins is the pledge, and whichever one is 1, 2, and 3 in the stages of a magic trick. They were saying that his Batman movies were like one really long magic trick, and I don't know if I actually agree with that, but it's interesting. And the idea that like a magic trick is basically like a story, like you were saying, and that the audience for a movie is very much like a audience for a magic trick. I think there is something to that. I think that I love watching like commentaries, listening to commentaries on movies, or watching behind the scenes footage of the making of and stuff like that sometimes. And then sometimes like when I hear that so and so hated each other into making this movie, it's like, oh, I don't really want to know how the sausage is made. I just want to eat the sausage. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think maybe like maybe I'm way off base, but someone who does enjoy watching the audio commentary or whatever, maybe they're someone who also wants to get into movie making or storytelling, and so that's why they're so into that. And I don't know if that's necessarily true or not.
Sorry, and this goes back to like Christopher Nolan and the magic trick cow. Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you. You said this goes back to Nolan and the magic trick.
Yeah. I was trying to like, because you were talking about that, and then you mentioned commentaries, and I was curious how that tied back into that.
I don't know. I think I was rambling. Sorry.
Okay.
No, I think that just like, sorry, I may have cut out on you also. I was saying that like maybe people who like, because you had mentioned.
I see. Yeah.
And like how this movie is, even though it's about magic tricks and stage magicians, it's also about movie making and the audience of movies. And like, I like watching behind the scenes stuff. I love reading interviews with storytellers, like, and this is not necessarily movies only, but I love reading interviews with novelists and hearing their thoughts on how they constructed a story. I love that, because I fancy myself in one day becoming a storyteller, like writing a book or something like that. And so I do find that interesting that you mentioned that, and that this is like about that, and how Michael Caine says they don't really want to know how the magic trick is done. And I think there's something to that, to the point of like maybe like Christian Bale does tell his future wife's nephew, I think, he shows him how it works, but then also he says don't tell anyone, because then the trick is worthless. And so he also told the little boy how the trick worked. And so I think you could say, well, yeah, the layman, they don't want to know how it works, they just want to be entertained. But some people do want to know how it works, because they also want to be the ones pulling tricks and entertaining.
Yes, yeah. And then you also have like a later quote that Michael Caine says where he's like, talking about Tesla's machine. He's like, this is the most disappointing magic trick because it's not a trick, it's real. And that like, and you have like Tesla talking about how like the reason he's like hated is because like humanity can only take one innovation at a time, and like he kind of envies the magician because it's like, once he innovated and he was heralded as like a savant, like he's like a genius, and then now he's like a madman in the eyes of the world. And so he kind of like hopes that, Angier and like whoever, like magicians, whatever they do, like they can keep, the world happy by like keeping them like basically like safe from the knowledge, from too much knowledge. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting thing that's about the audience. I think like, so what I like about Christopher Nolan a lot is that he makes movies that are meta, but he doesn't make self-referential movies. And I think for a lot of people, those are like one and the same, and they're not. Stuff like Scream is like self-referential. Well, okay, it's very meta, but like stuff like Deadpool is self-referential, where it's like very aware that you're an audience watching the movie, you know what the tropes are. And in the case of stuff like Deadpool, I find it annoying. And when I was in high school, the sort of meta, fourth wall breaking, self-referential stuff that I was primarily getting was in comic books, primarily written by Grant Morrison, et al. You know what I mean? Like all of the greats, right? Jonathan Hickman, the likes of that. And so when I was in high school, I'm like, oh, fourth wall breaking meta stuff is inherently cool and awesome. And everything I've seen since then has been a great counter argument to that. So now I kind of have like this little chip on my shoulder when anybody wants to start breaking the fourth wall, it's like, okay, it's amateur hour. This is someone who doesn't know how to tell a story, doesn't have enough confidence in their own internal logic, doesn't have enough like balls to establish their own world, like properly build their own world. Like this is just, I think, I wouldn't call it artistically cowardly. I would call it artistically unconfident and self-conscious, though. That's what I see fourth wall breaking and meta stuff primarily as now. You're not going to be Scream. You're not going to be New Nightmare. Like Wes Craven knows how to do that and make it fun. All right. But like when Deadpool does it, it feels sort of self-conscious and a little annoying to me because it's like they want to make fun of everybody, but they don't have an original bone in their body. And then it's like you have Christopher Nolan, though, where he's making stories about stories. He's making movies that are about movies, and he has a meta quality to like a lot of it, pretty much all of his movies. But it feels like he has something he wants to say about these. So they're meta, but they don't have to break the fourth wall. They don't need to be self-referential. So there's like a really cool aspect to the casting in this movie that you don't need to be aware of, but when you are aware of, it's really cool. So you have these two magicians. One is like the craftsman. He's a terrible showman, but he's a great magician. And then you have the other one who's a great showman, but he wants to be one of the greats. He's sort of like the character from Whiplash. If that character didn't have it in him to be great, he just wanted to like steal the greatness from somebody else, right? So you have Christian Bale, who is famous for being the sort of not character actor, but a method actor who like is all about the method, who is all about like changing himself physically and is always in character and is like, he like makes headlines for being that way. He will gain all this weight to be an American Hustle or to play Dick Cheney, or he'll lose all this weight to play the character in The Fighter or The Machinist, or like he just makes these like giant physical changes. And then it's like you have Hugh Jackman, who is this stage theater actor. He's like this like classically trained like theater actor from Australia, and so he is the consummate showman. And you have those two actors playing into those types, and they're both great actors, but I like that kind of meta quality to the casting, and I think neither of them have ever been as good as they are in this movie.
Oh, okay. I also when you said one of them is a great showman, and I was just like, oh, Hugh Jackman was in The Greatest Showman.
Exactly. I didn't even think about that, but you're right.
Um,
He's
yeah,
not
and
the great showman. He's the greatest showman, right?
yeah. And furthermore, you were saying, like, you mentioned American Hustle, and I kind of hate it when people do this, but I'm going to do it. This movie, I like when American Hustle came out, I saw people being like, "Look, it's Batman, Hawkeye, Rocket Raccoon, and Mystique," and and I'm just like, actors can be in things, okay? Like you don't have to. And I say that, and yet anytime like I work in a library and I was sorting through our DVD sleeves where we keep our DVDs, and there was this one movie, and I don't even remember the name of it, but it has Aaron Eckhart and Tommy Lee Jones. And when I saw that, I looked at my coworker and I said, "Look, two Faces," and my coworker was just like, had this the most disappointing look on his face when I said that. But this movie, you've got Wolverine, you got Batman, you got two Alfreds, although at the time it was just the one Alfred, but Andy Serkis has gone on to be an Alfred. Then you got Black Widow, and Rebecca Hall was in Iron Man 3. And so as a superhero fan, I'm always kind of like, oh, hey, that's kind of neat. But, in this day and age, when you get like 17 superhero properties a year, it's going to be harder to get a movie that doesn't have that many superhero connections. But
That's right. And it has a real life superhero, David Bowie.
yeah, which that's our connection here. Of course, when I first discovered this in high school, I don't think I was really listening to a lot of David Bowie, but I mean, he's really good here. Like I don't think I've seen much with him as an actor except for this and in briefly in Fire Walk with Me. But I know that he probably really enjoyed his life as a musical artist, but I really think he missed his calling as just a straight up actor. Like I really wish he had been in more films and playing different roles, because I feel like he just disappears into this role as Nikola Tesla. I don't know how you feel about it, but I thought he was maybe the highlight of the movie for me.
Yeah, the movie does a good job building up him like this like a mystique around him, where you're like, oh, like they keep saying Tesla. Are they? They're talking about like the Tesla, and then they are, and then it's David Bowie. Yeah, I remember when I first watched this movie, I thought he was really cool. And then I remember hearing somebody talk about this movie on YouTube, and they had mentioned that, oh, then you have this really cool David Bowie cameo as Tesla, and I'm like, oh, is he just a cameo? And I every time I watch it, I'm like kind of aware of how little he's actually in the movie, but he makes such a big impression that to me it feels like he is in the movie a lot more than he actually is,
Hmm.
because he's only in like 4 or 5 scenes. Now, kind of the way Nolan edits movies, he kind of has like this very quick cut, like sort of like dreamy montage style through a lot of his movies.
Yeah.
Uh, so like I'll say 5 scenes, but it could be like 6 or 3, depending on how you're counting it. But
Yeah.
he's not in a lot. He probably only did like 2 days of shooting, maybe one, but probably two. But yeah, like what's cool is like the sort of mysterious air that kind of hovers around the Colorado Springs kind of portion of this movie. He does a good job of embodying it. Like when he like walks through the lightning, and then like even when he's not there, like his presence is always felt. He's a very very talented screen presence and entertainer all around.
Hmm. And like you were saying, even when he's not there, because when Hugh Jackman's character first gets there, he says, "I want to talk to Nikola Tesla," and Andy Serkis says, no." And then so there's that bit where he meets him at the gate, and then there's another bit later where Andy Serkis meets him at the restaurant, and then he says, like it's still like, yeah, you're probably not going to get to meet him, and so they're building up like a magic trick, like you're saying, they're building up this like, ooh, what are we getting here? And then I don't think it disappoints. I can't imagine any other actor. I mean, maybe they could have gotten like a like some no name, like a character actor, but
Or
I
Daniel Day Lewis, like, go
eh,
the complete opposite direction of that,
yeah.
and just go for like this, like we're gonna find the greatest actor of all time.
Yeah, and but yeah, that I feel like they really played that up well. And so even though, like you said, he may not physically be in the movie that much, it building up to it, like, because and then there's also, I forgot, there's the part where Hugh Jackman goes to like 19th century Comic Con, and there's the big machine, and then they're like, oh, not Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, the smear campaign, and even there, they're kind of building up the legend of Tesla in the movie before you get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sorry. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was just you have notes. I'm kind of going. I'm playing it by ear here. So if you have anything you want to hit, please do, because I'm just kind of trying to hit everything I can think to hit.
Yeah. I got a couple of directions I could go in. I'll just say, you had touched on the Andy Serkis character. This movie has like so many like lines that my twin brother Spencer, and I quote all the time. And I'm like watching, like, oh, that's right, we got that from this movie. One of which, I'll just start because you had mentioned Allie, who is the Andy Serkis character, not in motion capture, just flesh and blood in front of the camera. There's a part where they're on the mountain together, and there's that really like cool, like it's this like wonderful, like ominous, mysterious scene where all the lights come on in the field, and Angier, the Jackman character, he picks up this light bulb, and he's like, "Where are the wires?" And then I don't know why this is the line, but like Andy Serkis just goes, "Exactly." But Spencer and I say that all the time to each other. Where like we'll be talking about a movie and we're like, "Wait a minute, this is a thing," and then the other one of us goes, "Exactly." And then the other two quotes that we always quote are two of Hugh Jackman's quotes from this movie. There's a part early on where he's like smooching on his wife, and she's like, "I got a name for you, the Great Denton," and he's like, "Ha ha ha ha." She's like, "It's sophisticated," and then he goes, "It's French." I don't know why him saying "it's French" is something we quote all the time, but it is. And then the other one is where he's like reading Alfred Borden's diary, who is the Christian Bale character, and he's just like, Alfred Borden's like, "I can't remember what night I taught and what knot I tied. Part of me is convinced it's this straight slip knot. The other part of me is convinced it's a Langford double. I can't know." And then Hugh Jackman goes, "How could he not know?"
Yeah.
We quote that all the time. So those are like the three big ones.
Yeah. And this movie isn't really like, it's not funny, but you're right. Like there are certain moments where you can kind of, a certain line delivery can kind of be a little funny. Like, for example, well, this is maybe one of the somewhat funnier moments, but Christian Bale's character has someone who's like his hype man, I guess, his sidekick, who's helping him. This is after he and Hugh Jackman have parted ways, and then they end up kidnapping that guy. His name is Fallon, I think, and then they throw him in a coffin, and then he shoots, like, and so like the gunshot like blows a hole in the coffin, and then Michael Caine says, "Saves me from cutting you an air hole." So like I'm like, okay, yeah, like that's one that I like quite a bit. But yeah, it's not a funny movie, but there are moments where I'm kind of, it's slightly a little bit more levity. I really like close to the beginning when Christian Bale is in prison, and then he opens up Angier's diary, and the first thing it says is a cipher, and then he kind of chuckles. And so as you watch this movie, it's like, oh, well, these two really hated each other throughout most of the movie. But I still love that even when Christian Bale knows that he's innocent, I mean, he's in prison for something he didn't do, and even though he lost his fingers because of this guy, and like he now his and maybe at this point he thinks maybe it's also Hugh Jackman's fault that his wife is dead. Christian Bale may think that it's Hugh Jackman's fault that Christian Bale's wife is dead, like, because she commits suicide, and we'll get into the twist there later. But and so even though he's got a lot of reason to really hate Angier, like you still sense like, oh, there's certain camaraderie there between them, even though they are bitter enemies. They still, like when he reads that and kind of laughs at, oh, a cipher, yeah, man, good times. Like I'm like, man, that's kind of cool. Like I'd love to visit the alternate universe where these two weren't enemies and these two were kind of friends working together, and they could have been the Greatest Showman instead of working against each other.
Yeah, it could have been Jackman and Bale instead of Jackman and Efron. Um, I want to see. I really want to see Christian Bale belt out. This is the greatest show, something like that. No, yeah. One thing you kind of touch on there is like kind of towards the beginning, like this hits the ground running in terms of how it sets up. It's like jumping back in time, like framing devices. Um, but the beginning of this movie, it always reminds me of the beginning of Batman Begins, where it's like, you have Jackman is like going into like Colorado Springs, and it's like you have these like shots of like the train going through the mountains, and like the music's like, and then like it feels like Christian Bale, Bruce Wayne walking through the mountains in like some Eastern country, and like the Hans Zimmer like it kind of has like a very similar vibe where it's characters traveling to like distant lands to try to find answers.
Yeah, yeah.
Gives me I always have to be like, all right, which Christopher Nolan movie am I watching? Because this only came out a year after Batman Begins.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I remember in high school, it was torture because I seen Batman Begins and I'm like, okay, I'm ready for the next one. And then it's like, oh, great, he's making some magician crap. And I mean, I loved it, but then I'm like, okay, and now we've got to wait another 2 years for The Dark Knight. And man, people who are like 20 right now, like you can't fully understand just how on fire the internet got set. Like, oh, like it's gonna be the Joker. Here's a leaked image of the Joker, and I mean, people were saying like he looks weird, like it's a dark background, but I mean, people were like just ravenous, waiting to devour anything for the Batman stuff at this time, and so this was. I almost imagine like no one probably. I've heard of the I don't remember what the expression is called, but like in Hollywood, like I'll do a movie for the money and then do a movie for the art.
One for you, one for me.
Yeah, yeah. And so I wonder if Nolan, I mean, like, he probably is really good at, even when he's doing one for you, he still manages to make it for me also, right? Like, even if he's doing Batman and that's a commercial thing, he's still able to make it a Nolan movie. But then it's like, okay, but
Yes.
I can't just make Batman movies for the rest of my life. I have to do something for me. And so that's where the Prestige comes in, or Interstellar. And then maybe he gets to a point where he can just do one for me, one for me, one for me, and that's great if he's able to do that. But yeah, you're right, like I do feel like there's some similarities there with Batman going to the mountain after he gets out of prison. I didn't think of that, but you're right, I feel like that's similar.
Yeah, that trying to do one for you and make that one for you also one for me. That's something Guillermo del Toro talks about, or that's what Hellboy was for him.
Oh
Where he
yeah,
was like,
yeah.
how do I make the one for them also one for me? And that's what Hellboy became. That's why he was like, I still want to make that third Hellboy movie.
Me too. I want to see what happens.
I just watched the two Hellboy movies again recently. Hellboy 2 is so good.
The
Like
only
it
two
is
the only two
so
Hellboy movies that exist.
yes. That other one might actually be the worst movie I've seen in my life. But like how good is Hellboy 2? Like it's so
Yeah.
good. I really want that third one.
Hmm.
But like it's never gonna happen. But he kept the dream alive because he was able to make the one for them, also one for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, when it comes to Nolan, he kind of because like you look at his filmography, and hold on, let me pull it up. I wrote these down. The Prestige was his fifth feature film, because he made Following, which was like a $1,000 or like $5,000 like nothing movie, right? He just made it with his friends.
Okay.
And then he made Memento, and I think that was another kind of like he had to find financing, and then he was able to like screen it at festivals, and then it picked up distribution, through like the Weinstein Company or someone like that. And then his first studio gig is Insomnia, which is a remake, and then he does Batman Begins, which is an IP like studio gig. Although like you said, he turned down Troy, I guess, and that would have been crazy to see that. But because I know that Christopher Nolan already worships at the altar of Ridley Scott, that would basically just be him trying to do a Ridley Scott impression in the heat of Ridley Scott just doing like sword and sandals like action movies. But
Hmm.
I've heard the story that like his wife Emma Thompson, who was like, or Emma Thomas, my bad, Emma Thomas is an actress, but Emma Thomas is like co-produces all of the movies with him, and she had gotten the call about Batman Begins, and she had said, I don't think he'd be interested in that. And then later she was talking to him about it, and he was like, actually, I have kind of wondered about the backstory of Batman. And so that's how Batman Begins came along. And so then, yeah, I think The Prestige is sort of like the one for him. And then like he signs on to do The Dark Knight and makes $1 billion. And then like everyone thinks Inception is going to bomb. So in order to finance Inception, they basically have him under contract to already have a third Batman movie under agreement, so that way they can like justify spending however much money they did on Inception. And because Inception made so much money, both Dark Knight and Rises make $1 billion, he's able to kind of do whatever he wants from then on out. So
yeah, that's really cool. And even though I have kind of stopped keeping up with what he does now, I still, like you, I had a soft spot for his career for a good chunk there. And I can appreciate, someone who just kind of comes up out of nowhere and then is able to shoot themselves up to the top like that. I think that's pretty cool. Kind of sort of reminds me of Sam Raimi a little bit too.
I can see that. Yeah. Nolan kind of follows like that film student's dream path where it's like, you want to make your indie movie, and then it's like you make, or I guess maybe Tarantino is like the proper film student dream, but like Nolan's not far behind. Like he had to make like the weird remake of like a beloved foreign film with Insomnia, but like, if you look at something like Batman Begins, that is just kind of like a studio gig. But I think a lot of kids my age discover Nolan through Begins, and it feels so like personal and like singular from somebody's vision, as opposed to stuff like, Batman Forever or Batman and Robin or like other superhero movies at the time. Because, I wasn't watching Hellboy, but I was watching like Fantastic Four. Next to Fantastic Four, Begins is like the greatest film that's ever been made.
Yeah.
Anyways, the last note I had, and we have a lot more to talk about with this movie, but like the last note I had is that, this Twin Peaks connection we have is David Bowie, but there's almost another Twin Peaks connection.
Oh.
It's not actually a Twin Peaks connection, but in my heart, it's close.
Okay.
So there's a theater owner in this movie named Merritt. He's that old man who was like, I'm going to hire a comedian.
Yeah.
You know how much I hate comedians. It's when, but he's played by an actor named William Morgan Shepherd.
Okay.
Now, he's been in a couple of David Lynch movies. Now, he played the iconic role of Man in Pub in The Elephant Man, but he also played the head villain, Mr. Reindeer, in the movie Wild at Heart. Now, Wild at Heart is like, in my head, kind of a Twin Peaks movie, because that's what David Lynch did between shooting the pilot for Twin Peaks and then shooting season 1 proper. So It's like he goes and does Wild at Heart in between the pilot and then season 1 of Twin Peaks. And so like half of the cast of that movie is just the Twin Peaks actors. So like Sherilyn Fenn's in a scene, Leo is in a scene, Cheryl Lee plays Glinda the Good Witch in a scene. Like the cast of Twin Peaks is just in that movie. And so Mr. Reindeer is like the head villain of that movie, and he's like, up with like Grace Zabriskie and like other Twin Peaks actors. So in my head, this like old man, William Morgan Shepherd, is in Twin Peaks, but he's not. He's just in Wild at Heart. But he's also in this movie. He's a Twin Peaks, a David Lynch actor. So I thought I should mention him.
I'm glad you did. I remembered that character as soon as you said the theater owner. I was like, yeah, that guy. And I don't know if I've seen him in anything else, but I remembered him like burned into my brain.
He looks exactly like my grandpa. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say he looks exactly like somebody who would own an 1800s theater.
The casting's on point. He looks exactly like the kind of guy who would own a theater.
Do you want to go on a rant about twins in Hollywood?
Yes, I do.
I would encourage anyone to go and listen to our spoiler podcast on Survival of the Dead also. just that can be a little a twin podcast to this one. Twin.
Yeah. Got him. So here's my thing. So for anyone listening who does not know, this is a spoiler podcast. So, you kind of low key gave away the ghost. No problem. You're like an hour into this spoiler podcast. But anyways, I'm a twin. I'm an identical twin. I have a twin brother named Spencer, and Spencer and I, we're best friends. He just moved to LA not even a week ago. So I have kind of a hang up, like as a twin, I'm kind of a stickler for the way twins are presented in media. And I'm pretty much uniformly, like, I dislike the way twins are presented, because usually you'll get one of a few things. Usually one is this character is a twin, but the twin died before the movie began, and it's like their sad backstory, right? Or it's like the kind of the catalyst for why things are the way they are. So like in Avatar, Jake Sully is a twin. His twin was like a scientist who died, so now he can come on in, and like because their genes are 100% the same, they can be like a good. This is also the plot in Eagle Eye, where Shia LaBeouf, he had a twin who was like a CIA agent, who was like this awesome, cool guy who is dead now, and now Shia LaBeouf is the guy who has to sort of like, live with that, like living in his twin's shadow thing.
Malignant.
Okay, that's so tasteless. I kind of like it. That like steers into the skid so far. I'm cool with it. But that's also fraternal twins, and that's its own can of worms. As far as like Hollywood is concerned, fraternal twins don't even exist. And don't you dare come in here, stupid commenters. Well, what about Star Wars? Shut up. That was a last-minute twist. That doesn't count. Luke and Leia were not twins until 1983, so go away. And their twinness matters not at all in their relationship or to the point of that story. It is really just a quick way to be like, how can we have a familial twist in this one that ties into a familial twist in the last one? Because Return of the Jedi is not a good movie. Go away. So then anyways, you have I really set the house on fire with that.
Anyway. I'm here for it.
But anyways, outside of like Gone Girl, fraternal twins don't exist, right? And I will say, but anyways, hold on, put a pin in that. But then the other thing that twins will do is like it's a last minute twist. This person was a twin the whole time, or it'll just be like a thing where it's like, well, twins genetically they're the same and they look so similar, but they're actually different people. Isn't that like novel? And so you'll have like twins just sort of being utilized for like whatever thematic point a writer's trying to do. So like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Us. Like, I really like the movie Us. I think Jordan Peele's a very talented, gifted writer and director. He can't even write twins well. Where it's like the Tim Heidecker and Elizabeth Moss characters, they have twin daughters, and it's like, we're annoying twins. We finish each other's sentences. We say the same things at the same time. Isn't it cute that we have twin daughters in this movie, because this whole movie's about doppelgangers that show up and murder you, and like it's kind of cute that we have twins. And like, wow. How dare you, Jordan? Like, not even you can do this well. And it's like Spencer and I will be watching movies, and it's like, wow, this is a good movie. But not even this great writer or director can do twins well. Honestly, there's only like a handful of instances where I feel like twins have been properly handled in media. One of which is the aforementioned Gone Girl, where Ben Affleck and Carrie Coon play fraternal twins in that movie, and I feel like their dynamic is just perfect. And good on them for actually having fraternal twins that are acknowledged by Hollywood. And the only other like instance of twins that I can think of that are good is actually this movie, The Prestige. And if you're a keen listener, you will say, but Connor, this movie utilizes twins for a last minute twist. And I would say you're correct. But also when you take the twist away, you can see the twin relationship and dynamic happening beneath the surface.
Yes.
It is very authentic. And that's why I'm saying Christian Bale has never been better than he's been here, because his performance as twins is on point. When you're watching this movie for the first time, you're like, wow, Christian Bale is a scumbag. But he's not. He is two very conflicted people trying to coexist as one person. Mm-hmm. And that performance of being like two different people kind of playing the same person is very authentic to the way it is to actually be a twin. People look at you and a person who looks a lot like you in real life, not in the movie, but they see one person and they expect you to be one person. I cannot tell you how many times, like, screw Adam Sandler in that Jack and Jill movie. This thing happened. This thing happened well before that movie, but it was renewed by that movie, which is like, wow, so if I hit you, will he feel it? Wow, can you read each other's minds? Wow, can you guys do blah 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 blah? Like, oh, you guys look the same, so you're like the same guy, right? And it's like, no, we have the same upbringing, we have similar interests, we have a lot of the same things in common, but our demeanors are very different. Our dynamic is unique. We have these things about us that are very distinct and different. And nobody sees that, so they don't care. They don't want. They just expect you to dress the same and act the same and finish each other's sentences and be amusing to another person. And so there is a sort of social performance that I feel like as a twin that you do to like sort of satiate people's expectations of you. And I feel like that sort of element of being a twin is weaved into the character of Alfred Borden or Freddy, because I feel like Freddy is the other one's name that he just doesn't allow anyone else to know. So, except for the Scarlett Johansson character. Anyways, that's my rant on twins. I really like the way the Prestige handles the twin twist, because it's more than just a last minute soap opera twist. They're doing something with that character beneath the surface.
Yeah, and like for example, the scene where Michael Caine and Hugh Jackman kidnap Fallon. Fallon is the twin, but he's got like, you know, marshmallows in his cheeks and he's got a fake beard, so he looks different. And also I kind of like that they don't ever give us a clear look at Fallon's face until like 2 minutes before the reveal of the twist. So you'll see him like turning around and leaving right when a scene is about to start or something. And then like he's kidnapped and you never get a great look at him. But like in that scene when, or it's after they've kidnapped him and then Christian Bale comes and gives his diary, or Hugh Jackman had the diary, but he needed the key to decipher it or something. And so he gives him the key. And then like when he's digging Fallon, or he says, is he alive? And Hugh Jackman says, how fast can you dig? And then he's scared. He's legitimately, and if this was just some dude that he hired, he wouldn't be that scared. But it's his brother who they've been living this life their entire life. Or I mean, like, maybe not their entire life, but since one of them decided, let's both be a magician who we've got this one really great trick and we can, you know, blow their minds with it. Ever since then, they've been like, one of them has had to give up his life for that, like you were saying. And then like, there's another bit. It's where, oh wow, I just blanked on it. But well, it's okay. But I like the idea. You know, whenever Michael Caine tells, this is before Hugh Jackman's wife dies, I like when Michael Caine tells Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, there's this magician, go and watch his performance, and if either of you can tell me how he does it, then I'll give you something, an introduction to this other guy. And Christian Bale figures it out. He says, you know, when he's pretending like he's when he's crippled and he can't, you know, he needs help getting into the car or the carriage, that's the performance. And that's kind of a hint at what's coming later, because already at that point, Christian Bale knows what he's going to be doing, and he's already doing the performance. And so on stage, that's just a small part of it. And so even though, like you said, the reveal is in the final act, it's different from Survival of the Dead, because Survival of the Dead, when that girl is arguing with her dad at the beginning of the movie, you physically have no way of knowing that she has a twin sister. The movie is not giving you any clues. This movie is giving you clues. And so it feels like they're just pulling it out of their butt in Survival of the Dead when you see a zombie riding a horse, and then later you find out, oh, that's a twin sister and another one is still alive and can still be part of the plot. But here, when you get the reveal and the twin, you know, one of them hangs and then one of them comes and shoots Angier, it doesn't feel like it just came out of nowhere. It really does feel like that, okay, these other scenes in the movie have built up to this.
Yes, I agree. I really like, also, like, this movie does do, like, it kind of does the things that I kind of scold other movies for doing. It is doing stuff thematically with twins. It is doing a last minute twist with twins, but because there is an authenticity to like those, like, because it's all like a lot of the character of Christian Bale is framed through a diary where he has to pretend to be one person. And you also have, like, in Angier's diary, he's saying like, this man, he's like this, like he's like a mind that's divided. That's another clue you get. But like thematically, and this is like the thing where it's like, I know like you have like people out there like say like, hey, representation matters. And then you'll have like, a cohort of like, I think ignorant people who say representation does not matter at all. I would, want to say for myself in my own like way of, from my own experience, call it silly or whatever, but this was one of those like movies that when I was a teenager, like seeing twins in this context, like it was kind of encouraging, call it empowering or whatever, but like it was cool because like Spencer and I both have an interest in filmmaking. We both want to make movies, but we also have our own ideas for what we want to do with movies, but we also want to collaborate together. And so there is like a lot of those like almost like contradictory feelings where it's like to a degree we share our life together, but we also have our own independent experiences and our own independent lives that are so closely drawn together. But what's kind of neat is that like thematically the twin is also being used as sort of like this it factor, right? Like Christian Bale comes up with this great magic trick, and it's because he just has something that the other guy just doesn't have. You can like make this something else, right? Like you can make this, I keep going back to Whiplash, right? But like you can like alter Whiplash just a little bit to make it about, instead of Miles Teller going against and trying to prove himself to J.K. Simmons, it's him and another drummer going against each other to try to get the spot, right? And one of the drummers can just be just naturally more gifted than the other drummer. And no matter what the other drummer does, he just doesn't have that it factor that the other guy has. And so what you have in this is like you have the Angier character who desperately wants to be a great magician. He just doesn't have it, right? And that it in this is represented as a twin. And so there was like something kind of cool where I was often like seen as half of a person. This movie was showing me like, no, you are more than a person because you have another guy who's got your back. You know what I mean? So there was something really cool about that, seeing that as a an adolescent. And let me tell you, man, this movie has never made me cry before. It still hasn't, but having recently said goodbye to my brother as he's moved away, we've been like the best of friends for 27 years, seen each other almost every day. We talk all the time. We lived together for the last like 3.5 years. Man, there were some parts that were hard to get through with dry eyes, especially the ending where they're saying goodbye to one another. And oh my God, that was rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, I've never met Spencer or Connor face to face, but I have done some letterbox stalking where I will, some days at work when things are slow, I'll be reading your thoughts on movies and TV shows, and yeah, you guys like you'll both like basically arrive at the same conclusion of your thoughts on a movie. But I love how, and this is not a bad thing, but like Connor, you will have like a long dissertation about what you thought about something, and then Spencer will say, this sucked. And I'm like, I'm laughing. Like, I think he had like a 1-sentence review of the aforementioned Malignant. And so like, you're right. Yeah. Like you two, you're coming at something from different ways. So yeah, if you're one of those people who think that they have a telepathic connection, you're wrong. And
yeah,
also,
either that or we're just really bad at being twins.
I also, I know it's not a movie. I would say Gravity Falls is really good at, look, here's two people, they're twins, but they're very different. They have different interests. Their personalities are different, but like you said, they've also got each other's backs. And I think that show did a really good job of showing that. And it also, the showrunner of Gravity Falls, Alex Hirsch, he is also a twin in real life. So that came from an authentic place.
That's awesome. I should check that out. I should say, WandaVision, for all of its problems, did get the twin dynamic pretty well too.
Yeah.
So I like that. Even though they are very much minor characters, certainly better than Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But those were just terrible kid actors. So in that movie, they were not good. It almost feels like they shot that before they shot WandaVision. Like, wow. I like the Doctor Strange 2 movie quite a bit. That was an element that I was kind of giggling at, but anyways, speaking of my adolescence, Scarlett Johansson is in this movie. And boy, is she ever. I don't want to be crass or any grosser about this, but I'll just say this was one of my first, like, I watched a recent movie and had, like, an instant crush on a new actress, because like I talk about like when I was in 6th grade, like my sexual awakening was like James Bond movies. Merriweather Catwoman from like the 60s Batman movie, stuff like that. And so like it was like a lot of 60s kind of Euro chic thing was sort of like, oh wow, okay, I like girls. And so then I watched this, and it's got the whole like, I don't know what era this is, but like the kind of like classy, everyone's wearing like corsets and has like, you know, cleavage and everything. And I'm like, I like this. So
Yeah.
anyways, just I felt like that was worth noting. Anyways, do you have any other notes on this or things you wanted to mention about this?
No, I don't think so. I'm sure the other thing I was thinking of when I was hints that Fallon was a twin was when Christian Bale's wife says, "I'm pregnant," and he says, "Oh, we should have told Fallon." And at that point in the movie, you're like, "Well, we've only known this guy for like 30 seconds. Why would you tell him?" Like, and the wife is probably thinking, "I just met him. Why would I tell him something that's like very personal between me and you?" And then later, you're like, "Oh, I get it." And you're also like, even though you like, because and when she says, you know, "Tell me that you love me," and he says, "I love you," and she says, "Today it's not true. There's some days where you say it and you mean it, and there's some days where you're more in love with magic." And that's another one where it's like, oh, okay, one of the twins genuinely loved her and probably would have been fine just leaving this whole thing behind and just being a father and you know, a husband, and the other one was married to the magic and really just wanted to be the magician. And so, and that's where it's interesting because uh Hugh Jackman is also obsessed with the magic and just wants to be the magician, and potentially could have had a relationship with Scarlett Johansson and throws it away when he sends her to spy on Borden, effectively terminating their relationship. And so, like, there's so many like parallels between one of the Bordens and Angier, that it's just really interesting. And it's one of those, like I said, you can watch it multiple times and get something different every time. I don't know. I really like it. Like I said, it's a movie like when you first start, at least for me, I was on Angier's side, and then I don't know at which point you would say like you're starting to not like, probably when he buries a guy alive, that's probably a line that he shouldn't have crossed, but it's still, you know, it's blurry. Like you were saying with Breaking Bad when we talked about the founder, you said you had a different moment where it was like, oh, this is the moment where he becomes Heisenberg than other people have, you know, that, and that's kind of become a meme where people will just will just say that. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really good movie.
I agree. I think that there are a lot of little fun references, like you were mentioning, like where Angier buries Fallon alive, and then like the next scene you have, you know, I'll call him Freddy, shows up, the one who is more, you know, who loves the Scarlett Johansson character. He shows up and he's like, "I've got a wonderful idea for a new trick. I'm going to bury myself alive, and then someone else is going to come along and dig me up." And that's that fun little reference to them being twins. Also, Social Network, that movie, terrible twins in that.
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
that was just a reminder of that.
Was it Armie Hammer?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Alleged
but,
cannibal and actor Armie Hammer.
I shouldn't laugh about that. That was mean, but like, "I am 100% cannibal. I want to eat you." I can only like read those Instagram messages with like his intense, deep voice. And I can't.
Yeah.
Oh my god. There's that new movie Bones and All, which is about cannibals, and I was like, why did they cast Armie Hammer? And it's got Timothy Chalamet. Like, this made by the same guy who made Call Me by Your Name.
Yeah.
Why isn't Armie Hammer here? Oh my god, I'm gonna get canceled for that one. Anyways, so I do really, really love this movie. There are things about it though that I don't like, but there's only a few. I don't like how many, like, so we're talking about, there's a lot of foreshadowing, there's a lot of like kind of references that sort of telegraph the twist or whatever. I would say there's a few too many of them. I think like off the top, like, because like we're not just telegraphing that Borden is a twin. We need to telegraph that, like, what the ending, like what's going on with the ending. Because what's going on is you have Angier, and he doesn't have a twin. he doesn't have like a double. He tries getting one for a time. We can talk about that if you want to, but like
Mhm.
he tries getting a double for a time. It doesn't work out. It results in him like getting injured, and like Borden's able to corrupt it. But what ends up going on though is like he gets a machine from Tesla that's effectively a cloning machine. It can
Mhm.
make an exact copy of you. And what happens is in order to do his trick, what he does is he doubles himself and it transports him like several yards away, right? That's what the
Yeah.
machine does. It makes a double of you, but the double is sent several yards away. And so what he does is he has a trap door which drops and like the Angier on the stage into a water tank where he drowns one like the person who's getting copied. And then the version of him that wakes up is like like his double is able to like show up and then be the transported man and then just like live his life until he has to perform the trick again, in which case he gets dropped down into a bucket of water and then drowns. But like the copy has like all the same memories and is effectively the same person. Um, and this is telegraphed throughout the movie. Early on, you have Michael Caine explaining like the 3 steps of a magic trick to Borden's daughter, and you have like all of these like identical parakeets. You have like the sort of smashing the cage, and then like you have the one bird that gets to live while the other one dies. Like you have like all these little things early on that kind of telegraph what's going on in the ending, and I think that's all cool. I do think kind of along the way there are a few too many cutesy references that feel like once you're in on the joke, those are there for you. But I am sort of in on it, and it just sort of feels like, aren't we clever? Didn't you not notice this the first time around? And so I'm like, okay, you didn't have to do that, but it's not like a flaw. I don't know, like it's something that hampers rewatchability, I think.
Yeah, I would say it is a little cutesy. You're right. It doesn't bother me though.
Okay.
But yeah, I going in on like your third or fourth viewing and I would say even like the most recent viewing here, I didn't really I wasn't like, oh, multiple pair. Oh, okay, yeah, like I that wasn't something that jumped out at me. But
I
I,
like
I
it all the way up through the one thing that kind of references both twists, which is where like he's talking to Rebecca Hall's nephew, and he's like, "No, see, he's fine, he's fine." And then the little kid says, "But where's his brother?"
yeah.
And like that's a cool thing. That's like, okay, that's calling out Borden's twin identity before like they've even alluded to it. And also it's suggesting that one of the parakeets is going to die, the other is going to live. And if they don't reference the whole like thing that's going on with Hugh Jackman in the last stretch of the movie after that, I think I would be totally fine.
Yeah. Good point. I feel like um and that's another one that didn't really jump like that. I feel silly for not noticing it when like that the where's his brother um that was also a reference to Borden. But you're right.
Mm.
I will say I do. It's kind of tragic that like Hugh Jackman's character really didn't because he gets a gun and shoots the clone, and he didn't have to. He could have because his problem with the guy who looked like him. There was a guy who was just some dude. He was a drunk, and they found him, and they got him to be the double so that he could reproduce Borden Christian Bale's magic trick of the that he was doing with his twin, and then Christian Bale, as you were saying, he goes and whispers in the drunk's ear saying like, hey, you're that magician, right? Well, you should extort, if I was your double, you got to be careful because if I was your double, I would extort you for money. And so then he, tears it apart. But then once Hugh Jackman has an actual clone with the same brain, of course, by that point, because Hugh Jackman wanted to be the man on stage bowing, and he was already like a little upset that the other guy, whatever his name was, that he is on stage, and Hugh Jackman wanted to be the one who is on stage. And so even if he has a clone with the same brain, it wouldn't have worked because if the clone is up there, then he's still below the stage, and he's like, I want that what he has. But what Christian Bale's two characters make work is that they interchanged it. And so
Mhm.
one of them would be up on stage taking the bows, and then the next night, maybe the other one would be. And so it's kind of tragic that Hugh Jackman, his first instinct is, I have to kill this clone. Like, it has to be all about me. I can't share any of this with anyone, even though he wants to do that trick, but he doesn't want to. Like, it would have been so much easier if he had just, had one clone and then, dismantle Tesla's machine, and then the two Angiers can go back to Britain, and then they can basically just do the same trick that Christian Bale is doing. But he's already, by that point, I think he's already kind of gone all the way to the dark side, and so that hasn't even occurred to him that there's something simpler where he doesn't have to completely ruin Borden's life.
Well, what I like is that, where the obsession sets in is like once Borden reveals his trick to the world. And what I like is that Scarlett Johansson and Michael Caine both, like, he's just using a double. And they're right. They are right. But, like, it's not good enough for him. It's like, it's not just that it's a double. It's like there's something else to it. It's like the bond that his double and him have that causes the illusion of, like, a singular, like, trick is what has him, because he tries the double thing. But what I like is that that's a wonderful sleight of hand too, is that Gerald Root, the double for Angier, is also played by Hugh Jackman.
Yeah.
They just gave him earlobes, and Hugh Jackman has a very, like, they both have long noses. Hugh Jackman has a long nose, but for the Gerald Root character, they added, like, a hook onto it. So it's like these subtle differences where it's like a hook nose and, like, detached earlobes. And so it's like they do a few things. I think he's like a few pounds heavier when he's Root. But what I like about that whole element is, like, you have Christian Bale playing multiple characters, and now you have Hugh Jackman playing multiple characters. And so if you're trying to read into the meaning of the movie, you can go the Robert Angier route where you're trying to overanalyze a red herring. Or, like, you're missing the forest for the trees. You're missing what's really going on. It's too simple that Robert Angier is just playing. Sorry. It's too simple that Hugh Jackman is just playing two characters. It has to be something more. Is Gerald Root like a clone of him that was sent back in time? Like, like, you know what I mean? Like, you can come up with all these, like, overly elaborate fan theories about what the machine does. Does it cause mutations? Like, and I'll tell you why I'm saying that, because the last time I watched the movie, that's what I was doing. I was like, there has to be more going on with the Gerald Root character. Why is this another character played specifically by Hugh Jackman? Why is it? Why? And, like, all of a sudden, I was obsessing over it like Robert Angier was. And so I think that's a really cool sleight of hand. If you are such a person who watches movies over and over again and try to read an over elaborate thing that misses the point of the movie, the way Angier misses the point of the trick.
I'm glad you said that, because I wasn't going to mention this, but now I am. The first time I watched this, here's how far off the mark I was. I feel ashamed to even say this. I thought that at the end, when you have two Christian Bales, I thought one of them was a clone. I didn't understand one of them, that they're just twin brothers. So, like, because Angier goes to Nikola Tesla and says, I want a machine, and he gets the machine to create the clones, and then, like, and Tesla doesn't actually come out and say, Borden never came to me to make a machine. He just says, okay, I'll build this for you. And then later, I think it's in prison, Christian Bale says, he never did replicate my trick. And so that's their way of saying what Christian Bale is doing is different than what Hugh Jackman is doing. But still, even at the end, like, the first time I watched it, I was still like, okay, so he's a clone, right? And I was confused. It took me a little while, longer than I care to admit, to understand that, okay, these two are twin brothers, and what Hugh Jackman is doing is, like, weird sci-fi shenanigans.
What I also like, though, is that this movie does have a sort of thing about art and technology, where Borden probably couldn't have gotten away with this act much later in history. He's able to just show up, I imagine, like, very shortly, like, because he talks, like, the diary that Angier's diary starts off where he's like, we just met a few days earlier, Christian Bale and I. We were both young men who were, like, eager about being magicians. And so I imagine Borden probably just showed up wherever this starts, wherever it takes place, only a few days earlier, able to, like, take the two identities of the twins and just become one person and do this act. And because being a magician was this lowly profession, you probably didn't need to have like identification. There wasn't as much regulation about stuff. So it's like it was probably during this time much easier to get away with this kind of a thing than it would be any time later. But also using the sort of benefits of being a twin and like being able to do that in order to perform your trick, because he's able to do it, not everyone can do it. Robert Angier wants the trick. He doesn't have a twin. He doesn't have a proper double to do it with. He doesn't have the trust in another person to do it. So he just gets technology to do it for him. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, and that's sort of like the kind of the history of technology, right? Where it's like, we want something to do this thing that other people can do that we can't do. So then you get like this great equalizer in technology. And then I think the movie's almost like making a sort of statement on the way technology and innovation works.
Yeah.
And I just had that thought while we were talking.
Yeah, no, that's a good. And see, this is what's great about this movie is that we could probably go another 2 hours talking about little bits of this movie. Like you could almost like just watch like 1 minute of the movie and then say, okay, that's it for today. Let's talk about this 1 minute of the movie and just keep going until you finish it. Like it's really I'm just impressed at how many layers there are. And like this movie is 16 years old. I feel I'm 1,000 years old. But like there are things that you're mentioning now that have never occurred to me in all the many times that I've watched it before. And that's what I really like about it. It's very layered.
I agree. There's one thing I don't like about the ending of this movie though.
Okay.
That I'll say to kind of, I guess, be my final point. For a movie that's all about like artists and their art, I wish there was a greater emphasis on the art of magicianship. Mm-hmm. We get a lot of shows, but like when Robert Angier finally is able to perform this trick, and it's like he's finally taking the applause. He's standing there with the spotlight on him, and at the end of the movie, he says like it was the look on their faces. And like that's why you do it. That's why people who make movies do what they do, right? It's about the look on their faces. It's why so many artists want to be they want to wow a crowd, right? Mm-hmm. When he finally does that trick, it's like 5 seconds of people applauding. You don't get a look at any of their faces. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. I wish we stayed in that moment more. I wish the catharsis was greater because we've been building this whole movie for that, and we don't get it, and I find that disappointing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, one that I hadn't thought of, but yeah. And I imagine that's because that's getting close to the end of the movie, where by that point, like you're kind of blowing through it. Like you said, you get these like montage scenes, and like there's one part where within like 10 seconds, Christian Bale is talking to Fallon, and he's like, why can't you outthink him? And then like again within 10 seconds, he says, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to be a magician anymore. Like he's beat me. And then he like goes, he says, I'm just going to watch it one last time. And that's another thing is that if Christian Bale had greater self-restraint, then Angier would have been going indefinitely. He would have been like, I have to keep going so that I can trick him into coming back here so that he will get, imprisoned for murder, right? Like the whole thing was to try and lure him in, right? Like because he wouldn't have been happy if Christian Bale just said, I'm just going to retire and I'm going to let him be the better magician. That wouldn't have been good enough for Hugh Jackman. And so like that's another thing where like, I don't know, it's there. He recognizes the obsession in Borden and knows that Borden won't be able to walk away because he himself has also been obsessed. So I found it really interesting.
You touched on another. I'm sorry, we keep going on because there are so many fun things to talk about with this. Mm-hmm. I love the detail in this. This is such like a movie-ish detail. CinemaSins would nitpick this as a problem. I like it about this movie. I love how they both keep getting called up as being volunteers for the other person's trick.
Yeah.
Where it's always like, I need a volunteer. And it just so happens that the one volunteer is always Christian Bale, or it's always Hugh Jackman who's going to shoot off his finger. It's like, yeah. I like that. I think it's kind of a funny, very movie-ish story kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. I kind of wish, because at the beginning of the movie, when they're working for the other guy, whoever his name is, and he keeps saying, are any of you gentlemen sailors? And they're both like, no, I'm not. I kind of wish that like later when Christian Bale is about to have his finger shot off. It like I kind of wish he would say like, "You wouldn't be a sailor, sir, would you?" And then he looks in his eyes and he's like, "Oh no, I've called up the wrong guy." That's where you're like, "No, wait, I need a different volunteer. Sorry." Yeah,
hold on. Sorry, that's another detail I'm just making a connection with. They talk about are either of you sailors, and then you have that one story that
oh yeah,
Michael Caine tells about a sailor friend he knew who drowned.
And then he brings it up again later. And yeah, and I felt that's one where it's like you feel bad even after like Hugh Jackman's character is pretty despicable by that point, but when Michael Caine says, I told you that drowning was like going home. I lied. It was like agony. And I'm just like, because he not only has he killed however many of his clones through drowning, but also now he has to think about, my wife died like this. And that she didn't have a peaceful, death. Like, which I mean, you could have like known that watching it happen on stage. But yeah, so that's one that, even though by that point we know Hugh Jackman is the villain, I'm still like, I still feel bad for him when he hears that from Michael Caine there at the end. It's a really good one. I kind of just want to go watch it again.
Yeah, thank you so much for picking this. I'm glad we got to talk about it. I think this is probably my favorite movie that we've talked about on the podcast.
I think so too. Yeah, there's a lot that we could still be talking about. But what do you have for us to talk about next time?
Hold on, I am going to bring back my handy dandy list again.
Oh boy! So whatever we choose, it's my fault. You should have said exactly. Sorry, I wasn't doing a good Andy.
All right, so, you ever play Russian roulette? Here we go. All right, sir. Pick a number between 1 and 20.
16.
16 is an episode of The Mod Squad.
Oh, okay.
From 1970.
So this will have 2 Twin Peaks connections?
It should, yes. So Clarence Williams III and Peggy Lipton are 2 of the 3 leads of The Mod Squad. Peggy Lipton, of course, plays Norma, the waitress on Twin Peaks. And Clarence Williams III does show up for an episode, too, and they actually get to be on screen together. Anyways, this is The Mod Squad, Season 2, Episode 26, titled The Loser, from the year 1970.
Okay. For anyone, Parks and Recreation fans or The Office, Rashida Jones is the daughter of these 2.
No, actually, she's the daughter of Peggy Lipton and Quincy Jones.
Oh, you're right. I wasn't looking at I was just in my mind. I was like, boring. Okay.
No. I can see what you mean. Oh yeah, they were on a show together. Then they like there's probably like a cute reference in Twin Peaks where you get them on screen together because they used to date or something like that. Yeah.
Right.
No, it's a different guy.
Okay. Yeah. Season 2, episode 26.
Yeah, season 2, episode 26. I think it's on YouTube.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, then we will talk about that sometime in the future. I'm looking forward to this because I've never seen this show, so I don't know what to expect, but I have a feeling we'll enjoy it.
Yeah, me too.
All right. In the meantime, I am the Comics Kid 2099.
I'm Connor Nielsen.
And we'll see you guys in the future. Have a good one.